Put a confident kid in a house with lots of rules, and you've basically created a competitive sport. Let the power struggles begin. If our goal is kids who willingly cooperate and productively participate in family life, then we need a different approach. Hi, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Ask Mom Parenting podcast. We take the mystery and the yelling out of modern parenting and offer real-life self-help for parents. Whether you're deep in the toddler tantrums, navigating tween and teen drama, or somewhere in between, you'll get clarity and actionable tools one episode at a time. I'm Sue, and with me today is my guest, Lauren. And she is a busy mom straight from the trenches, raising 4 children and also running her own business. She is deep in it. And just like so many of you, she's got a parenting question that I think many of you are feeling the same overwhelm as well in your home. If you've been listening to Ask Mom, you know my goal is to make parenting easier in real life, not in theory, not with complicated scripts, and not with advice that falls apart the minute your child pushes back. Today's episode is how to parent with fewer rules, but still get more cooperation. Everything that I talk about is built around helping you become a prepared parent, someone who can anticipate power struggles before they hit, and who knows how to have a training conversation ahead of time so kids understand what is expected. That's how we raise kids who can self-regulate instead of needing constant reminders from us every day. Lauren and I met through our businesses, and she heard me talk about my philosophy of having only 1 or 2 rules in the household. And she told me she had 5 rules just for dinner. And she wants to know, how are fewer rules even possible, and how does that even work? So Lauren, walk us through your dinner time at your house. What are some of those rules and what usually happens when you enforce them?
Yes, so dinner time is very loud. It's very chaotic. Everyone's trying to talk at the same time. And it's a lot of good energy, but it's too much, especially when we're trying to focus on eating. And then my husband and I are at that point in the day where we're overstimulated and trying to just relax, and it comes to a head most of the time.
Okay. So when she asked me about how could anybody just have 1 or 2 rules, I realized, when I'm working with this content every day, it becomes innate to me. And when she asked me this question, I got really excited because my brain was kind of like a bunch of dominoes falling. I started thinking right away, that this question gets to the heart of nuanced parenting where the real wisdom lives. And it's the kind of strategic thinking that doesn't just manage behavior today, but prepares kids for the adults that they're becoming. Lauren also asked me about managing screen time without having it turn into a daily battle, and how to handle sibling dynamics when everyone's competing for attention. And I suspect that by the time I get done explaining my structure today, that it might solve all of it. We'll see how it works. So let's jump in, because these are hot topics. Lauren, give me a little context of, how old your kids are. You've got 4 kids.
Yeah, I have 4 girls. They are 9, 8, 5, and 3.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about the parenting methods that you're using now.
Yeah, I really connect with the calm leadership style of parenting. Mm-hmm. And I have a tendency to yell, and I came from a household that was big on yelling, and sometimes yelling feels good.
Oh, it sure does. It sure does.
But not after you're done with doing it. So, but when I'm in control of myself and relaxed, I really am a very calm and kind of fun-loving person. And so that's how I really try to show up as a parent. And, I'm focused on building relationships with my kids where they respect me. And I see that kind of come up sometimes on what does that mean to respect me as an adult, but also to relate to them and to be emotionally connected to them. And so those are some of the things that I kind of am trying to do with my parenting, leadership being really a theme.
Okay, so when you mentioned that you have 5 rules for dinner, would you say that you've got a lot of rules in the house? I mean, overall, are you setting the tone with rules around?
Yeah, rules to me means clarity. So I think, if I'm not clear with them, then I can't expect them to do what I expect them to do. So when I set rules, it's really around like, hey, this is the expectation and there's going to be a consequence if you don't do it. So,
Mhm.
when you say like, do I have a lot of rules? I'm like, well, I don't know. It feels weird to say yes, but I'm like, well, what would it be like to not have rules?
Okay, so what we're going to talk about today is just nuance, okay? We're splitting hairs, but it's this definition that I think is going to be super helpful for you. So let's first talk about rules, all right? And what a rule-heavy home feels like depending on where you sit, all right? So for parents, having rules, defining your communication with your kids, from ages 9 to 3, defining that as having rules and consequences. That's your definition. It means a lot of micromanaging. It means constant reminders. It means corrections, enforcement, and you're carrying the mental load of how something should be done and when it needs to be fixed and how it needs to get done. So parenting feels like managing a system that will never run on its own because you're setting a rule, then you're following up and you're making sure that each of that behavior gets done times 4 kids.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for kids in a rule heavy home, that environment feels a little bit more heavy. All right. It feels controlling, overwhelming. There's a lot of do's and don'ts, and I don't know what actually matters to my mom and dad. All right. So there's a lot of restrictions here and there, and I know they want me to do this, they want me to do that, they want it like this, but it feels like I don't know what's the priority. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually with a lot of rules, kids will stop learning self-management and they'll start learning, mistake management because, oops, I was supposed to do it this way. Oh, I've got to sit down here. I've got to, they're focusing on not making mistakes, but they're not really self-regulating. And so what tends to happen in a rule heavy home is that they'll rebel. And that's what I think we see when we see the behavior, and all the energy and all the hype. It's really a form of rebellion. And strong-willed kids, they don't resist rules quietly. I would know. I was one of them. Put a confident kid in a house with lots of rules and you've basically created a competitive sport. Let the power struggles begin. If our goal is kids who willingly cooperate and productively participate in family life, then we need a different approach. One where kids feel part of the system. They're not constantly worried about whether they followed every rule correctly. We are unintentionally inviting our kids to rebel and into power struggles if we do set the tone of our home with a lot of rules. And so, yes, what I'm saying is that less rules can actually lead to better behavior. Now, before you think that I'm talking about gentle parenting and mayhem and the kids run the show, absolutely not. Because like you said earlier, I am about leadership parenting. So this sounds counterintuitive, and I love that because parenting is not about repeating the same old patterns that we were raised with. It's about questioning what actually works. And if we're finding ourselves reminding all day and following up on the rules and now the kids are misbehaving, then we know that that's not working. And once we admit that, now we are open to learn a new way. And, while everyone else is over there tightening control, we're going to be building systems that create self-control. Now, here's how we're going to do it. You will have 1 or 2 non-negotiable rules. With only 1 or 2, your child learns something very important. And that is that when my parent says something, it matters. They mean it. So when we only, at the top of the hierarchy is our 1 or 2 rules. That's it. Everything else under that hierarchy is handled through boundaries. And this is semantics, right? This is definitions, but this is where it's important because when boundaries get paired with my earned access method, which I'll get into, it's when you combine boundaries with earned access, you create something beautiful called leverage. And leverage is what drives good behavior. Rules feel heavy, boundaries feel open, and they create space. So let's map this system so we can start to apply, a little meaning to it. There's 3 components to what I'm talking about. And when they work together, parenting gets dramatically easier. So number 1 is rules. That's the top of the hierarchy. Then our boundaries and then earned access. And each one of these has a job. But when you blur them or you're inconsistent, you get a power struggle. And when you use them strategically, kids are in an environment where they self-correct. So, for number one, rules are non-negotiables. All right. Rules are for the big things. They're like safety, values, long-term responsibility. They provide clear instructions, the do's and don'ts, like bedtime, curfew, shared expectations around respect. When I help parents set rules, we start number one, the most important thing is with your goal. So you want a rule that can last, like, say, 3 to 6 months, not something you're negotiating every week. We're redefining how we think of a rule. In my case, with our 4 kids, now for you, you've got kids spread out a little bit in age, 9 to 3. All right. For me, it was our oldest was 3 years apart from the triplets. So I kind of had a core group of, somewhat in the same age group. So between ages 3 and 6, in my home, it was important to me that my rule was that you pick up after yourself in shared spaces. So toys, clothes, supplies, if you're taking out the markers, you're putting them back. And that was my one rule, 3 to 6-ish. That was what was important to me. I don't care about your rooms, but we're going to define this as shared space. You're not leaving your stuff out on the kitchen table. You're not dropping your coat on the floor, shared space. All right. Then by the ages between, like, say, 7 and 11, I had 2 rules because, at that age, they're still listening to us. And it just made sense. So in our case, I had my rules that we're eating together at the table. No other room will be allowed food. I'm not taking kids with their snacks and their crumbs and all the stuff. Okay. So every piece of food that you consume is being done at the table and we're eating together. And that's kind of easy to do between 7 and 11 because they're not really busy with friends and activities so much yet. My second rule at that age group was no name calling. I did not allow the word stupid. They could have said shit if they wanted. I didn't care about swear words. Okay. But stupid, absolutely not. And bored. I won't be bored is the B word. We're not talking bored. That's a state of mind. Fix it. I was not allowing any, like, you're not the brunt of jokes. We're not playing tricks on each other. We're not using words against each other. That was a big thing for me in creating the culture of, sibling connectivity. So, all right. Then between 12 and 18, I had one rule. And in our house, again, you guys will set your own rules. We'll talk about this when I get done explaining this whole process. We can go through this with you. But between 12 and 18, I had one rule, and that was curfew. And I chose curfew because it teaches time management. It teaches communication and responsibility. So for curfew, that might mean, me at 12 years old, they're out at a friend's house. I say, hey, be home by dinner. They have to communicate. They have to tell me what's going on. They have to, find a phone, or I don't know if we've given them a phone by then. But again, all of this is up to you. I'm just giving you the structure and then you decide what works for your family. But curfew was the one thing. And we can talk about consequences, but in our case, curfew was one of those things where, as they got to be new drivers, if they showed up 10 minutes late and I didn't know that they didn't communicate, hey, I ran into traffic, or whatever the case is, they're busted back. There's always a consequence. We can talk about how to build consequences in. That might even be a whole other podcast, but you get the idea. So with your rules, all right, the top of the hierarchy of getting 1 or 2 rules. And when you and your husband sit down, you discuss what your rules are and what's important to you. You're going to have a training conversation, why the rule exists, why it's important to you, what the expectation of that rule is, and what happens if it's not followed. And you can come up with consequences, and they don't need to be punishments. They can be consequences. But upfront clarity on your rule is keeping life simple and doable for you and your kids. So in our case, before we made eating together at the table a rule, we talked about why it matters to our family and what that actually looks like. Before we set curfew, we explained the purpose behind it, what staying in communication does, and what that looks like and what the consequence is if it's missed. So everybody is prepared in advance. I'm prepared because I'm setting my rules. I'm then sitting down and in a non-emotionally heightened time, we're having a training conversation. Here's what's going on. Here's why. Now my kids know, ooh, that's a rule. Like, ooh, she means business. And now I know what's expected of me. So now we get to boundaries, and boundaries is where independence is built. And this is where parents tend to get stuck, because a boundary opens up the gray area around rules. All right. A rule is a hard line and a boundary gives a limit, but it doesn't dictate how you reach it. Boundaries allow for problem solving and they say, I care that it gets done, but I don't care how you do it. This is where kids get to practice judgment, planning, self-regulation, decision making. Rules teach compliance, and compliance is important in society, and we need our kids to comply, but we don't need them complying over everything all day, right? So rules teach compliance, boundaries teach independence, and that difference and that distinction is huge. I've told this story before, but this is an interesting example. When we had our first baby and I worked from home, I had a little old lady that was down the street that watched him a couple of hours in our house 3 days a week so I could work. And I'm a new mom and, I was trying to get the more ounces into him, to gain the weight so he'd sleep through the night. So I'm like, yeah, I need you to push 8 ounces. So I walked by the room where she was sitting watching TV with him and his bouncer, and she was feeding him, and she had his head tipped all the way over her arm, and she had the bottle tipped like behind his head. And I was like, what, what's she doing? And I was like, I really wanted to get the ounces in him. I'm thinking this is not going to work. So I didn't say anything. And I went to the bathroom. I came back around and she held up the empty bottle and said, look, 8 ounces down. And I was like, that was like a big thing for me to realize, like, I don't care how it gets done, it gets done. And that was my first, as a new mom, one of the things that I learned about control and how to let go of control. And that's kind of this fine line with boundaries as well. So I'm going to show you the difference between a rule and a boundary. I've written down some examples here. So the rule version of do your homework after school every day, no screens until 7. So we're tempted to say the kids get home from school, I'm going to teach them discipline. They're going to sit down, have a snack, and they're going to do their homework, and then it's done. And then they can have their free time. And again, this is age dependent. So some kids do need a little bit more structure, but you're with a 9-year-old, she's going to need some, boundary and freedom. Mm-hmm. The temptation is to say, do your homework after school, no screens till 7. That's the rule. The rule now requires monitoring, reminders, constant judgment. The boundary says screens happen after your responsibilities, and your responsibility is either the chore or the homework or dinner cleanup, whatever you set, those expectations. So you've got the boundary. Screens happen after that. Yes, you're still going to be monitoring, you're still going to be following up, but it gives the kids a chance to say, I'm in charge of my time. And if I don't get it done, then I do fall behind. And it does rely on us as parents to let go and let our kids make decisions in the safety net of our home. That is how they learn self-regulation and discipline and consequences. When we sort of have that intentional detachment, we set the boundary, but they've got the freedom within the boundary and we're managing that. All right. So another rule, like for maybe a younger kid, would be, I'm not helping you if you've got this attitude. When you have this attitude, I'm not helping you. Rule. A boundary says, I'll help you when your body's calm. So now that gives my child a way to go, oh, I'm in charge of, when I calm myself down, now she'll help me. It's not her telling me what I need to do. So one teaches self-regulation, the other polices emotion. Another rule would be get your pajamas on right now or no story. That's a rule. You're making a statement. It's a declaration. Get your pajamas on or no story. But a boundary would say, when pajamas are on, we read stories. Now that gives the child that autonomy to go, oh, I have to do something without me being told. So tonight we might not get a story. There's going to be a consequence, and it's not a punishment. Oh, oops, we ran out of time. That's how that would play out. Boundaries are kind of like a restaurant menu, like you're free to choose on the menu, but only from what's actually available. So you've got the rule, that's the non-negotiable. Boom, 1 or 2 of those. The boundaries are, here's your parameter, and you get to choose between that. And here's the key idea. Boundaries create motivated behavior because the structured system, not the parent, does the heavy lifting. I'm the parent, I'm creating my rules in advance, I'm creating my boundaries in advance, I'm creating a structured system, and now my kids know where they fall in line because I've created it and structured it up front. The parent isn't deciding what happens in the moment, the child's behavior does. So when outcomes are predictable and unemotional, kids stop focusing on fighting you and they start focusing on the freedom of their choice. And that's how self-management replaces a power struggle. Okay, so Lauren, hearing all of that, I've got one more thing to add here, but let's stop here and ask you. So, based on your dinner example, based on what you've heard so far, where is this landing?
If the rule in my house is that we eat dinner together, then how do I have a dinner that is a time where we can connect and it isn't chaotic? So I guess what are the boundaries that are, how can I think about the boundaries that I need to put in place
Okay, so
at mealtime?
first let's talk about how we're gonna, again, the structure. So, have you talked to your kids in advance before dinner, like maybe at breakfast or on a weekend, or maybe have you created a hard stop? Guys, I need your help. Have you taken a time to do a real training conversation about dinner and made a declaration of how important this is to you and how you expect the behavior to look? And have you done a training conversation and declared it a rule and explained to them how that looks? Have you done
No.
that? Okay,
No.
okay, great, because that alone is going to get you halfway there. All right, so you're going to take a time. I love family meetings, and family meetings are really just, again, a training conversation. But when we're getting certain behavior that we want to stop, this is a great technique. So you're going to find a time, like maybe on a Sunday night. All right, you're gonna have some ice cream and be like, guys, we're gonna have a family meeting. Kids at this age, 9 to 3, they love this stuff. They love it. You get some type of cute treat, you get whatever. Guys, Mom and Dad have found, that we yell a lot at dinner. You're gonna explain, you're gonna take the time to train and say, we've got a new rule. This is gonna be a rule of the house. We're explaining because now you stand for something. And now the kids know what you expect. And you're gonna explain to them why this is important to you and that it is a rule and how a good dinner looks, where we sit in our seat, we get all the wiggles out, we enjoy dinner. And the other thing that I'm going to suggest is that you get them involved. Are they helping set the table? Are they putting the bread out? Are they involved in the process of dinner? Because you've really got this thing with the dinner time. Really, let's lean in a little more and find out what else we can do besides having the training conversation. How else can we get them involved so they're participating?
Mm.
That is an important thing too. So at the training, you sit them down while they're eating ice cream and you tell them, here's my expectation. This is now a rule of family. Have you noticed that mom and dad get frustrated? We both work. Explain this, put this understanding and wisdom into their heads so they understand. We would love your help. Come up with 4 jobs and let them pick. So in your training in advance, you're going to come up with, ways that 4 kids can help.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to be able to pick what they want to do. I know that, you've got the 3-year-old and the 9-year-old. Okay, but it'll work. It'll work itself out. They are now getting buy-in. They're now involved in the process and they now know what you expect. So the rule is a major declaration, and this process is repeatable for everything forevermore. So, this training conversation, I'm going to grab control up front. I'm going to take the messaging and the expectations. I'm going to grab that up front and teach it and train it. So I would say to try that first.
Mm-hmm.
Training conversation, expectations, declare it a rule, and get them involved in the process.
Yeah,
Okay.
I love that.
Okay. Now let's get to the good stuff. Okay. It's all good stuff, but okay, you've got the rule, you've got the boundaries, the freedom in between. That's the structure. Now, my earned access method is the leverage. And this is a beautiful word because that's the incentive system. So earned access is where behavior changes without fighting. And this is where boundaries come to life. Earned access connects responsibility to privilege. Instead of negotiating and explaining or saying no on repeat, we're planning ahead. And here's the shift. Kids want access to things that they enjoy. All right. There's always some type of carrot. Parents want the house to run smoothly and kids always want something. Whether it's a dessert, whether it's a movie, whether it's screen time, whatever it is, again, with a little bit of forethought in the beginning as to how I can structure these conversations, that will play well for how this comes together. So we stop arguing about screens and start connecting access to contribution. Now you're going to create a simple chart And then you're going to assign small time blocks, like 2, 3, 4 minutes to everyday responsibilities. Now you're talking about dinner. I think we've got your dinner time solved with the rule. All right. But earned
Hmm.
access can be applied in any other ways that you feel that you need it. But the key to success is planning ahead with your partner and then presenting to the kids and getting their buy-in and agreement up front. So everyday ways that kids can earn screen time. Like earlier on, one of your questions was, 5 rules for dinner. And then you said, oh, what about screen time? And then you asked about making sure siblings are all competing for attention. So earlier in the podcast, I kind of predicted that this system was going to help all of these issues. And I think that it will.
Hmm.
But like, you'll create a chart, based on age appropriate, efforts, everyday ways that kids can earn access or friend time. Being respectful. You're going to create this chart and you're going to come up with age appropriate things that you want the kids to do. So if they want, your 9-year-old might want more time with friends, or she might want more screen time, or however you decide to package this. Being respectful with siblings, 3 minutes. Getting to bed on time, 2 minutes. Again, you're going to create all of this. You're going to sit with your husband, decide what's important to you guys. Then you're going to present this in another family meeting. Give a chance for your dinner rule to work and getting the kids participating in dinner, and then wait a week. But these are all tools that you can just kind of have in your back pocket to get better behavior. You'll create the chart, and don't forget to get the kids involved. Kids love being a part of their own rules. It is hilarious when you say to a kid, there's a teenager that I coach, and he got in trouble at school, and the mom was like, he's grounded for 2 weeks. I'm like, hey, hang on. And I said, when he comes home, ask him what he feels inappropriate. He's 17. So I said, ask him what an appropriate amount of time for him, would be that he's offline. And he came up with 2 weeks. And I said it was his idea. So it works so much better when you get the kids involved and you ask them, instead of you administrating a punishment, you ask them, what do you think would be a reasonable consequence for you? It writes itself. It's amazing.
Hmm.
So brushing teeth without reminders, getting out the door on time. There's a million things you can use based on your home and what you're trying to get your kids to do. One of the things that I suggest is that with this effort, the temptation is to be like 10 minutes of screen time. Don't just give them a few minutes, because I'm telling you, you're going to build the chart and they're going to have at eye level and they can add, and then, will there be fudging? Will there be maybe lying? Will there be, but you're going to be shocked over how well the siblings start getting along when, when they earn 3 minutes of screen time. So it's just this earned access approach, again, is setting that boundary, and that expectation up front, and then giving them a way to prove to you that they can self-regulate and earn something. They don't just get screen time. I'm not over here managing and making sure that I'm dictating who, when, where, and how. Here's the boundary. You get an hour of screen time, and I don't care when it is. I care that, it's not after bed. You don't have access to your screens at that point. But like, you manage your time. And I'll tell you how this translates when they get older. And I've said this before, when our kids were like 8, 9, and 10, they had to mow the lawn. And I would say, you're mowing the lawn, it's Saturday. And then I would have to kind of stay on top of it and manage it, that it was getting done. And then when they got to be teenagers and they were driving and they had a job and they were balancing school and friends and whatever, I'm like, hey, this is your weekend to mow the lawn. I did not care when, how, whatever. If you have to get up early to get it done so that you have free time, this is the gold of the boundary, the freedom within the boundary, because now they're setting their schedule. They're knowing when they have to get it done. And yes, sometimes I did have to send out a reminder, on Sunday, hey, the lawn's not mowed. We had one kid put the little headlight on and he was mowing the lawn at 8 o'clock in the dark. I'm like, yeah, but it got done. And yes, I am managing, but guess what? I'm not doing. I'm not yelling. I'm not, punishing. I'm not doling out consequences and punishments. So this really works to try to create an ecosystem with which you're setting the tone and they're being able to decide within that tone. So those earned access ideas and the time, whatever they're earning, whether it's, I want to read my book, and then maybe you've got one of these kids that reads her book for hours and hours and gets nothing else done. She has to earn her reading time. So this is just what I'm saying. It's built in. It's a built-in system. When these are planned ahead and then presented based on your goals and the age of the kids, it's just gold. Now, if kids want money, I mean, a whole other topic is allowance, and I'm not about allowance. But if kids want money, that's a separate category. I'm not about allowance at all. Like, money is for extra value add jobs. So, like, if you want to wash my car, vacuum my car, reorganize a space, paint a small project, like these things, I'll give you a little bit of money for. But everything else is you're contributing to the home. And this is how we take care of each other and treat each other. So this approach does two powerful things. It removes power struggles around screens and, puts the control into your child's hands while you still get the rules and boundaries met. And it teaches kids that privileges follow responsibility, not arguing and reminding. And there's no yelling, there's no negotiating, just accountability, and it's in their hands because you set the structure and they have to fit within it. Okay, so that's the structure. We can apply this to your real life examples, or if you've got any other questions based on what I've said to help this information sort of kind of come to life.
Yeah, I love the idea of the earned access, and it makes me think of like what they're used to at school. Their elementary school does so many layers of, reward and expectation and kind of what you're describing. But I would need to do some thinking on what my kids actually want. Like that part I'm kind of hung up.
That is tricky. Okay. And this is why this is a different layer of parenting. This is a much more strategic way of thinking. And when you start to learn how to structure this communication, it becomes easier. When I first learned this information and I was reading about behavioral psychology and the Montessori ways about building respect and building independence, my brain was going to explode. It took me weeks, months to structure a consequence. I didn't know. There's two different types of consequences. Like, this should be common knowledge for parents, and I don't know why this information is not out there pervasively in like public schools and just the way that we handle kids. We for some reason just continue doing the things that were done to us, the yelling, the punishing, the grounding. And it's really not what works, because if it worked, all of us would have parenting figured out. Mm-hmm. And that is why I feel passionate about sharing this information, because I'm trying to help parents learn this new way. And it is a flex, and it is like learning a new language. And this isn't intuitive. It takes practice and time. And, that's why I do workshops. That's why I do coaching, because I can share this information and it makes intellectual sense. But what I find is that when we're back in the home world and we're back in that grind and that muscle memory goes back to the patterns, we're like, oh shit, what was I supposed to do? How was I supposed to say it? That's why sometimes I'll do, some free Zooms or whatever, people can hop on and I can explain it so that it makes sense in your home. So your question is common. It's kind of a drain on the brain to understand, oh shit, this is not how I normally communicate or how I work, or we're not used to pre-structuring our communication with our kids and our family. But when we get used to it, and when we get our kids involved in the topics and get them to choose, when they have ownership and they have buy-in up front, it's a game changer. Okay, so one last thing about rules. Being a strict parent with lots of rules often masquerades as being a good parent. We tell ourselves that control equals leadership, and that our kids should do what we say, do it right, and be happy that we asked. And I know, because I believe that too. But teaching our kids real independence is messy, and it takes time. Control might feel effective in the short term, but it teaches kids to hide the truth, because honesty feels like just too much trouble when there's a lot of control and rules. And instead of preventing power struggles, too many rules actually create them. Leadership does not come from control. It comes from structure that teaches kids how to manage themselves. If you like this episode, my email list is where we can stay connected in between podcasts. Head over to askmomparenting.com, where you can sign up for Ask Mom Minute, where you'll get weekly 60-second tips to handle everyday problems like sibling conflicts, defiance, backtalk, and how to lead with confidence and clarity in your home. It would mean so much to me if you'd also help us grow our parenting podcast so that we can help more parents by sharing with a friend, liking and commenting and subscribing. This tells the algorithms that we're doing something right. Thank you for listening, and happy parenting.